All right, turning your Bibles to the book of Mark, chapter 9. Forgive the gum and the cough drops. I got some sort of allergy thing, and so I'm kind of fighting it hard this morning. We're about to finish up chapter 9, a couple verses here. In order for me to understand it, we're going to be talking quite a bit about what we already looked at last time. I'm struggling with verse 49, interpretation of it, and I made mention of that before. That I'm not really sure about some things, and I'm not ashamed to sit up here and say, when I come to a verse I don't understand, I say I don't understand it, and move on. But I would like to try to talk about as much as I can, or I shouldn't say it that way. I don't want to wear you out, but I would like to talk about it as best I can before we move on. I think the key to understanding this passage is to go back to verse 30. In other words, we can read individual scriptures, and sometimes we say, well, I really understand this passage. I really understand this passage. I really think I understand this passage. But when you back up and take into account what's all been going on, it might change the way you see a passage. That doesn't mean that somebody's taught it wrong, or that, I told you before, the Bible has a lot of depth to it, so that sometimes there's like a diamond has different facets, different faces. So the Bible, you can maybe look at it from another point of view and say, well, I see that in it too. Nothing wrong with that. It's a bigger book than I am, and deeper than I am. Yet, I believe that we can read the Bible and take it simply and understand it also. It's not necessary to dig deep or to go deep or anything like that. But there are times when we realize that's where we're at. We're in a deeper section, maybe. Having said that, Jesus, remember from last time or however many times ago it was we looked at this, that he had told his disciples that he was going to be crucified. He didn't use the word crucify. He says in verse 31, Son of Man is going to be delivered to the hands of men, and they'll kill him. And after he's killed, he's going to rise from the dead. Now, he'd already said that to the disciples before. But remember, Peter took him and rebuked him, said, no, you're not going to do that. And I'm going to, I'll never let that happen. And Jesus told him what he thought of that. He said, you're thinking like men think. You're thinking about the things of men. I'm talking about the things that are of God. Now, Peter, I'm going to give him a break. He couldn't possibly have grasped, how is that of God? See, we look at the gospel as a wonderful thing and say, yes, that was our salvation when Jesus did that. But they as yet really didn't see that, although he talked about it a lot. So here he talks about it. It says, verse 32, they didn't understand. And they're afraid to ask him what he meant. At one point, they even said, what does he mean, rise from the dead? As though that were some kind of a mystery statement. It's literal. Really going to rise from the dead. But they said, nah, it must mean something else. Right after that, as they're traveling, Jesus asked them in verse 33, what were you disputing about among yourselves as we came on this way? Disputing means more than discussing. There were some disputations. In other words, there was some arguing. I'm not talking about knock down, drag out necessarily, but he knew and could even tell by the conversation that he was hearing whether they let him hear it or not. Did you ever drive along and hear your kids in the back seat and somebody says, yeah, I can hear them, I can feel them, they're back there throwing things. I'm talking about when they're just quiet, but yet they're discussing something. You can tell by the tone. There's coming a storm because you hear that. So Jesus said, what are we talking about? Well, what it was, says they held their peace, verse 34. I'm just briefly going through this. They were talking about who was going to be the greatest. I'm going to die. They're going to beat me up and treat me really bad, and they're going to kill me. What's on your mind, boys? Who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to take your place? I think I should. I think I'm the best qualified for that. is that the attitude? It's kind of indicting, isn't it? It's an indictment to us that when somebody's telling us about what they're going through and their troubles, we're more concerned about ourselves. So then Jesus says, talks about when he understood, he knew that. He knew what they were talking about, whether they would tell him or not. So he says, look, if you want to be first, you're going to be the last, you be the servant. And then he takes the child and he sets that child in the midst of them. And the Bible says, then he picked him up. He took him in his arms and he held this child for his teaching lesson, my object lesson. And he says, he said, if you would receive one of these children in my name, you're receiving me. In other words, what he was seeking here is an answer to their problem. He wanted them to see, look, you got to be like a child, not like childish, but like a child in that you put away this ambitiousness of. Now somebody said, well, Brother White said not to be ambitious, so I'm just going to go home, prop up my feet on the couch, and I'm not going to work no more. That's not what we're talking about. Jesus wasn't suggesting that. But this ambition of I'm first, and because I'm first, that makes you last, Ernie. I mean, somebody's got to be second, and it ain't going to be me. You see how that is? Look, Jesus said, if you want to be first, why don't you serve? Just serve and serve and serve. And in my eyes, you'll be first. Just serve and give of yourself and give up what you want for others. You'll be number one with me. You'll be first. That's backwards from the world. Jesus told his disciples, he said, how do the kings of this world do things? Do they take taxes of their children or do they take them of others? They said, of others? And Jesus said, yeah, that's the way they do it. He said, but not so in my kingdom. Jesus said, the Gentiles, they exercise authority over people. And in other words, that's the way the world works. They don't vie for president of the United States so they can be a servant. They vie for it so they can have power. Somebody said, well, that's just the way it is. I understand that. But it's just a point. The point is, they're not trying to be a servant because they live in a palace and they, to us it'd be a palace and they have all this power and they tell other people what to do. Jesus said, no, in God's eyes, what he wants you to do to be first is to serve, serve, serve. And so he picks up this child and he says, when you receive a child in my name, it's you're receiving me. That's my heart. My heart is this innocence of sharing and of giving, and you're receiving the one who sent me. That's what you need. You need to be more like a child. Then John, he says, well, we saw somebody out here, casting out devils, but he wasn't with us, so we told him not to. And what that had to do with this, I do not know. But Jesus said, look, don't forbid him. He's doing a miracle in my name. He won't lightly speak evil of me. If he's not against us, he's on our part. And as far as rewards go, if he's doing it in the name of Christ, he won't lose his reward. And if somebody gives you something in the name of Christ, they won't lose the reward. But back to my subject, verse 42, if you offend one of these little ones, then he goes into this whole thing about sin and what we should be willing to do to put it out of our lives. What's that got to do with this? Ambition drives so much in this world. In order to get ahead, some people have and will do anything. Warning, Jesus, I warn you, your ambition is leading you down a wrong path. And I want to be first, and I'll be the one, and they're bickering, and they're not done with that. They're going to do it again. They're going to have a mother come and try to get who be first. And Jesus, I believe what he's saying is, look, you need to be careful. There's a danger in this more than you can see. And sin is creeping. He's knocking at your door. Be wary and take heed, take warning. Be willing to pluck out your eye if that's what you have to do, or cut off your hand. He's saying, how much do you want to not offend God? How ready are you? How willing are you to go? I understand. we get into a big argument, and somebody says, well, you cut your foot off, you can still go to the wrong place. That's not the point. The point is the willingness to push sin out of my life. And this ambition, I want to be first of all, Jesus said, no, if you want to be first, you should be the servant. You should be seeking to serve. Like this person here, this disciple over here, this woman. Now, he had other disciples besides the 12. And the Bible says they ministered. That meant when the disciples needed food, there it was. They had seen to that. And when somebody went ahead and got them a camping place ready for that night, said, okay, I'll make the fire, I'll do this or that. That's the first in my sight, Jesus said. They're seeing to all of our needs. You guys are kicking back, taking advantage of it because you're here in the teaching, but these are really important people. See, these people who care about the needs of others and they clean the toilet and they do all this stuff, they're the important ones. They're the servants. They're first. I believe what he's saying is, there's a danger. You need to be careful here about what you do. And he said, you offend one of these little ones. We begin to talk about sin, and we talked about the timeliness of this passage in today's society, where that children are becoming the victims of ambition and of pleasure, and we got into all that, and it really fits today's society. This passage. But then he says, after he's get all these stark warnings about sin and how God feels about it, and he about hell, and he's warning, this is the end of all that. You don't want to do that. Then he says, verse 49, for everyone shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. Salt is good, but if the salt have lost its saltness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace one with another. Now, I believe the last verse explains a lot, because they hadn't been having peace one with another. And they still have yet to have peace with one another later on. But he says here, now they're not Christians, I know that. Nobody's saved yet. But they're followers of Christ, and they're Jewish, the faithful Jews. And so he says to them, you don't have peace with another. You need to have peace one with another. And in order to do that, you need salt. Somebody said, I don't know exactly how that plays out. Well, so we made quite a study and went back and dug and came up with all these passages and in Leviticus, Numbers, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Job, Ezekiel. You can look and find. Now, there's not a lot of references to salt in the Bible. It's only in there maybe 35 times or so. And a lot of times it's just talking about a land that's full of salt. You can't grow nothing. Or Job's wife turned into a pillar of salt. Or the Salt Sea, the Sea of Galilee, or not Sea of Galilee, but the Dead Sea. It's also called the Salt Sea. It's got so much minerals in it, you can float on it, You just lay back and you won't sink because it's just full of minerals. And a lot excuse me, a lot of it's salty. But then there's those verses that talk about salt. And in the scriptures, in the law. So when he said, let me get back there. Everyone shall be salted with fire. Every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. They knew what that meant. So in the law, they were commanded as Jews, you offer sacrifice, it must have salt with it. Okay? No sacrifice is allowed to be given without salt. Also, when they'd make a covenant, it would be by a covenant of salt. They would make a promise and they would give salt. And this was to say, this is an everlasting covenant. As salt preserves food, this salt is given. Salt was a precious commodity. You couldn't do without it. You needed it. And people valued it. And it had a preserving quality. You salt meat and you salt other things. And then also it gives, the flavor to the food. So you'd say, what was this talking about? Well, I think if we go to Colossians, we would see it there. He says, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to give an answer to every man. So, you see, he wanted them in that passage there in Colossians. He said, now these are Christian people. These are saved people. But he has to say this to us. because we need it. Look, when you speak, use grace. Season your speech with salt, with grace. I don't season my speech with grace enough, Ernie. I give an answer, and my wife will go, what are you angry about? I'm not angry. You sound angry. and I don't season with salt like I should. I just blurt things out and say them. Now I gave up cursing. I never was much of a cursor, but any cursing I ever did, I don't do that no more. I gave that up a long time ago. He's not asking you to give up your cursing. You should have already gone there. So what's he saying? He's saying, well, when you speak, another passage of scripture says, speak the truth in love. See, I usually speak the truth, and I don't have much love involved. It's just, there it is. You're going to die and go to hell. Well, that's not a way to talk to somebody. All right, so I take from that, again, he says, so every sacrifice shall be salted with salt. When they offered up that sacrifice to God, God wasn't going to eat that sacrifice. The priests were. They were going to eat that. But he said, and you offer it with salt. And in other words, you're giving this with a good grace. And you're offering to God. And that salt represented, your attitude and your God receiving it with the right attitude. So he says, every sacrifice should be salted with salt. You need grace in all the things you do. You guys are attacking, just fighting, going at this. You're concerned with who's going to be first. Jesus might have even said, and you don't seem to care that I'm going to die. He didn't say that, but he might have said it. And it's me, self first. And so he said, you're going to get into trouble. This is going to lead down, to borrow somebody else's expression, a bad road. Sin is knocking at your door, and with the way you're going, it's going to get you. You need to be thinking about this. You need to be considering, man, I want to avoid sin at all costs, but instead you're going headlong in the wrong direction. Remember that there is a final day. He's being stern here. Yes, you can't deny it. And it's a matter of heaven or hell. And you'd be better off to give up anything to go into heaven if you had to limp in on one leg than to have two legs to be cast into. You're looking at this world all wrong. And so he's trying to teach them something, and he's teaching us something at the same time, isn't he? Everyone shall be salted with fire. Now, that's another one. I just look at that and say, man. But I have to go back and say, what's he been talking to them about? And I remember where the Apostle Paul told the Corinthians, he said, look, every man's work is going to be tried by the fire. The day's going to declare it. And if your works are not going to, if they don't hold up, the fire will burn them up. Now, he himself will be saved, but it'll be after going through the fire. It'll be yet so as by fire. He'll have to go through the fire. So, is he saying that we're all going to go to hell? Well, I don't think so. So, I gather from this that he's saying, look, your lives are going to be tried someday by the fire, and all your works might be burned up if you're not careful, because you got bad. You're going down a bad road. This vying for who's going to be first in the kingdom. This not considering the temptations that lay in your path, and not considering how very, very, very important it is that you not go down this road of going into hell. You say, well, I don't think. Look, Jesus is saying to communicating to the gospel church, look, if you're not perfect, you're going to go to hell. He's not communicating that. What he is communicating is that we ought to be aware as Christians about our life. And what happens is, what people do, they don't go out and lose their or throw their salvation away. I just got up this morning and I can't find it no more. But they begin a process. They little at a time, begin a process. And pretty soon, they just get colder and colder and colder. Pretty soon, they're into all kinds of things of things they shouldn't be doing. Pretty soon, Jesus who? That's what happens. But it started way back there. Now, I don't know if you can see that in this or not, but he said, look, everyone is going to be salted with fire. You're all going to be tried by God. Even the church is going to stand before God and give an account and be tried. He says, your works might be burned up. You yourself will be saved, but look, don't you, how, do we want that shame? Do we want that embarrassment? Look what he said. Every sacrifice is going to be salted with salt. So you're all going to be tried, and anything you offer to God should be done with a good grace. Salt is good, okay? That's fine. He said, but if the salt have lost its saltness, wherewith will ye season it? Okay, so somebody said, how in the world could that happen? Well, let's look at it literally. We're going to take the time to do this, I think, to maybe better understand. So let's put all the spiritual aspects aside. Is Jesus making up a fairy tale here about salt losing its saltiness? I believe every one of them understood exactly what that was. So they went down to the Walmart and they bought Morton salt, right? No. So what do? Well, they have this salt mine down the road, and you can just go in there and you just pluck this white stuff off and this little powdery stuff. No, folks, that's refined salt's been through a factory. Okay? And Americans eat a whole lot too much of that, and then they got this sodium problem because it's refined salt. I'm not saying it's sinful. I'm just saying that's what we have. Okay? They didn't have that. So how would you get salt? Well, they would dig it out of the earth or the sea. You could do it either way. You could go to the Dead Sea and take a big scoop of this water and probably some of the mud too, and then take it home and let that sit, and it would all settle down. And you know what you had on top? Some real briny, salty water. Okay? If you found it dry, it's the same process. You would take all that dry earth home, just really salty earth that you found. It's got minerals and everything in it, which is really good. Well, the way that works from a scientific standpoint is it makes the sodium so it's not so bad for you. Anyway, they bring that home, and they'd have to get it washed out. So again, they would add water. And in either case, whether you got it from the murky sea or you got it from the mineral earth, either way, it's got to be washed out with water. And you could go in there and say, I need some salt. They come up. If they had real good salt, they might put it on straight. You know, it'd be pretty dirty, have a lot of dirt in it. But if you did it the water way, you could go in there and get a little cup, come in there and sprinkle that, and you got some really salty water, and you sprinkle on your food, and you had salt. But having this white powdery stuff in their hand that's clean with not anything in it, they didn't have that. So they understood the concept is after you use this and use this and use this, pretty soon, what you got there is some bland stuff that's no good. You take it, you throw it out, and it made real good. You pack it down, and it make dead and kill the grass and everything else. You could have a nice flat, compact surface outside, trodden under the foot of men, and that's all it was good for at that point. Jesus wasn't talking about something that they didn't know what he was talking about. When he talked about farming or whatever, vineyards, they all could familiar. This was familiar. They understood that if you diluted it down enough, the salt would lose its savor, its saltness. And so Jesus said, salt is good. But if the salt have lost its saltness, wherewith will you season it? You couldn't fix it back. You'd have to go back and get a whole new salt, but you couldn't use that. So Jesus' warning here again is doesn't change the teaching. The teaching is, look, the way you're going, focused on yourselves, focused on who's going to be the first, so I can be first, and so he can be second, or she can be second. This worrying about all these other things and not concerning yourselves with the kingdom, not paying attention to sin, not paying attention to my warnings. Look, salt is good, and you need it. You need to have salt in yourselves. But if you let it get diluted down and watered down, you won't be able to put it back. You won't be able to fix that. That's a scary thought. It's a scary warning, in my estimation. Maybe you see it differently. It's one of those passages where it's really hard for me to say much more about it. But then after he says it, he says, have salt in yourselves. You lose your peace and you lose your grace. You don't have much left. You're just an angry, bitter person who nobody wants to talk to. And I'm not saying you can't say, well, Lord, forgive me, and Ernie, forgive me, and Harlan, forgive me, and everybody forgive me. I want to do better. Okay. But better mean it. You got to get serious about the thing. Too often times, it's just the repeat of the same old thing over and over again. They didn't really wake up from this. Really quickly, chapter 10. And he arose from thence, and cometh into the coast of Judea by the farther side of Jordan. And the people resort unto him again. And as he was wont, he taught them again. So this is saying, in other words, this is saying, this is familiar. Again, he says it more than once. And they resorted to him again. I like that word. You know, when you seek a resort, somebody says, well, you mean like Palm Springs? No. I'm talking about like when you seek a resort, you seek a shelter. You're seeking someplace to resort, to go and to be out of the elements and out of the protected. So it says they resorted to Jesus. You know, the world needs to resort to Jesus. We as Christians, we don't resort enough to Jesus. Sometimes we get busy and we forget, and God doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to resort to him. I'll wear him out. You can't wear him out. And he was wont. Now that word means not like want, like desire, but want is with an O, and it means like this is what Jesus did. This was his habit. This is what he practiced. This is what he liked to do. This is what he was wont to do. He was wont to teach the people, and so he did it again. So it says, and the Pharisees came to him and asked him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? Tempting him. So that question must be understood. It's a tempt. They're tempting him. Now, why would that be a temptation? They want Jesus to say something to get him in trouble with the people, kind of like a presidential candidate does. He's trying to get his opponent to say something stupid. Or he or she, in this case. So that's what they were trying to do. Can I get Jesus to say something stupid? Well, let's get into a tough question. And what do you think would be a good question? So I'm sure they planned this all out. They said, well, let's ask him about marriage and about divorce and all that. And we'll sure to get him to say something that get somebody angry at him. We won't get these people turned against him, you know. So in the midst of his teachings, the Pharisees are there. And I don't think that Jesus started teaching. See, the Bible doesn't give us all that. So he's been teaching, I think, for a while. And they just stood there and waited for their chance. Maybe different ones asked questions. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. But can you imagine he's teaching, talking to the people, and all of a sudden you hear this, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for any cause? Jesus stops and looks at him. And so he says, and he answered and said to them, what did Moses command you? So Jesus knows them. He knows how they are. And so he says, you ask me a question, I ask you a question. He did it all the time. He always, not always, but a lot of times answered a question with a question. So he said, well, what did Moses command you? Not what did Moses say. What did Moses command you? And they said Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. Now, you notice the words that are being used here. They said, is it lawful? Jesus said, what did Moses command? They said, well, Moses suffered. Now, lawful and command go together. Suffered does not. Suffered means permit. So Jesus asked, what did Moses command? Go back and read the Bible. Moses did not command them to put away their wives. Okay? Moses suffered them to put away their wives. Suffered means permitted with it was painful. That's what suffered is. Okay, we use it only one way. I hit my finger, ouch, it hurts, I'm suffering with a sore thumb. They use suffer to say, I will allow you to do this. I'm really not down with it. It's kind of painful. It's going to cost me something, but I'm going to let you do it anyway. So it's not simply permit. It's to permit with the pains associated with it. So what happened was all the people they weren't saved. They were just Jews, but they were supposed to be the followers, faithful of God. But they had all kinds of problems. And one of them was they couldn't get along with each other after they got married. And different ones wanted to get free of their marriage. They were going to, this is where God, this is not a comfortable topic for some people, but this is where God met man, the Jews, where they were. And so if God didn't allow it, we're going to have adultery and fornication and all kinds of things. And so God said, well, I'm not going to tell them. Moses, you tell them. God didn't want any part of it. And so Moses went out and said, well, if that's the case, if that's what you're going to do, what we'll do is we'll have a divorcement, but God never did sanction it. He never did say, I command it, but he says, listen what he said. Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. Jesus answered and said to them, for the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept, Moses, not God. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female, and for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. And they twain shall be one flesh, so then they are no more twain but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. That's pretty plain. Jesus didn't squirm. Now, you go back in the law, you're going to find this over and over again. You'll find a man went out and picked up sticks on the Sabbath day and was put to death. Now, small crowd here. All right. I know this is touchy for some people. Yet David, he did some things. He wasn't put to death, folks. In fact, God said, I'll put away your sin. His baby died. This is not Christianity under the Old Testament, okay? This is not Christianity. And there were things the Jews did a lot of times and got away with, if you will, in this life. I have no idea what God's final judgment will be. But God didn't necessarily swoop down and just clean up everything that happened. A lot of times, he wasn't pleased. A lot of times, he was pulled back from the people, and the Bible says every man did what was right in his own eyes. That means that they weren't consulting God at all. God didn't come down and say, I'm not going to let you do that. Does he do it today? No. You can't tell me that God is involved, is blessing the transition of some child in the surgical mutilation. Getting on that again, but hear me. God is not pleased with it, but God is not coming down and stopping it either. That happened in the Old Testament a lot. You'll see things, you say, well, what's this in the Bible for? Because that's what happened. Doesn't mean God agreed. I mean, God said, well, you're gonna go off and walk the crooked and perverse, so be it. But I'm going to judge in the last day. That still stands. God still will judge someday. If not, he judges. I like him to judge right now. Because then I say, well, okay, he's judged me, and I'm duly chastised by God. God, thank you for that judgment, that chastisement. And I'm sorry. Thank you for your blood. Move on. I'd rather be chastised today. I don't want to wait to the end and say, oh, Lord, I did as good as I could. God's not going to put up with that. There's a way been made. But under the Old Testament, we see a lot of things there. And so this problem with this putting away wives, they phrase it as this. Moses told us to do it. Moses did not tell you to do it. But if that's what you're going to do, Moses gave them a precept so that they could do it. We're going to have to close with that. So this is not just an argument over divorce. This is an argument over what the Bible actually says. See? There's two different things going on here. Yes, they are arguing about divorce. The Pharisees are trying to trip him up. But also, they want him to admit that Moses told the people to do this. He did not tell them to do it. That's what the people were doing. And God said, Moses, you can do this. I'm going to allow you to do this, but I'm not. You go tell them. This was not what God intended. They didn't often do what God intended. A lot of times the Jews were doing exactly what God never intended. They offered up sacrifices on the high places. And a lot of times you'll see a good king would come along and still those high places weren't torn down. It wasn't until I think one king at the very last, maybe Josiah, finally tore down the high places. But even in the times of Solomon, there were things going on. And God did not destroy that nation yet. He was long suffering. But there were many things, Ernie, that they were doing he was not pleased with. It's not a sign that God's weak. It's a sign that God was being long-suffering and patient, reaching out to mankind, trying to get to him. But a lot of times God would just pull back and say, do what you want to. You're going to pay for it someday. And they did pay. They paid dearly. They suffered and were just, we won't get into all that. But anyway, I think that's where we're at with this passage here. It is about divorce, but it's also about what does the Bible say? And they were trying to say that Moses said one thing that he didn't actually say. All right, we're going to, Brother Harlan, we're going to ask him to dismiss the Sunday school.